Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share tools and perspectives to equip leaders in self-development and team connection. I am your host, Natasha, and I am excited to share today's episode with you. Our episode today is a conversation with entrepreneur and U.S. Army veteran Jon Harmeling on using the entrepreneurial mindset as a perspective and how that can impact your career and your team. Hello, Jon. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell us your style of leadership.
Sure. My pleasure for being here. I've seen some of the other folks you've had a chance to sit down with and interview and connect with, so I appreciate the invite here. This should be a fun time together. For myself, name is Jon Harmeling, so originally from South Florida here. Joined the Army. That's where you and I happened to cross paths there as we served our country together, and then recently hired from the Army and now off to some different things here. But yeah, in terms of leadership, when you talk about style, I think there's kind of two different ways to look at it. One is, what is a leader, right? Which is a huge question of, there's probably thousands of books written on it kind of thing. And I remember one of my senior leaders at one point said, a leader is someone who has followers, which I was expecting something more in-depth kind of thing, but it's true. So how do you get those followers? And I think that comes from not just because you're in a position where they have to follow you and have to listen to you, but it's in terms of respect. That is a big piece. So how do you earn someone's respect? How do you maintain someone's respect? And to me, that's 3 C's. So competence, confidence, and caring. I heard that from somebody that's definitely not my own original thought. But competence, you got to know how to do the job. Confidence is how you portray yourself publicly to the folks that are on your team. And I think those first two make a fantastic manager, a transactional manager who gets stuff done. But it's the third one, the caring, which is where you start bringing in the people aspect of things. And that's where I think you go from a transactional manager to a transformational leader.
I love that. And I think that when we look at different aspects of leadership, whether it's a style or even a definition, there are some things that just do transcend. Even if you look back through like Stojdil, when he put together all these different thoughts on leadership in the 50s, if you just leaf through that, there's still some things like the transactional versus transformational. They're just these leadership principles that really are pervasive, which I think is really amazing.
I'm with you on that one. I think, some of these principles are absolutely timeless. And then, so I guess another way to look at that question, style of leadership, so I'll just tell you, for me personally, where I feel the most comfortable and arguably thrive is in a very autonomous environment where essentially, my boss, so to speak, would give me the keys to the shop and say, all right, Jon, this is your mission. This is what you're responsible for. Here's your team. Here's your budget. Here's your assets, resources, whatever it might be. Here's your left and right limit. Here's your boundaries. So as long as you kind of stay within these boundaries, you can lead however you want type thing. And so I feel like in that kind of environment, when I have a mission to go do and I'm empowered and resourced, that's very exciting to me. And I think we'll talk about it here a little bit more later, but one of my first eye-opening kind of jobs in the Army was I had my leader who absolutely provided that environment for me. And it was just so eye-opening where I was looking around just kind of like, wait, so I can just make this decision and move forward? And he's, yeah, Jon, you're in charge. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is so cool. It's been 2 years working for that gentleman, and we still keep in touch today. It's been about 15 years since we worked together, but really excited to be in that kind of environment.
I love those two different perspectives too on assessing your own style of leadership. So I know you said you worked with that gentleman kind of closer to the beginning of your career. Was that person the kind of catalyst that empowered you to identify yourself as a leader? Or was there something else that made you say, oh man, I'm the leader, I'm the person in charge?
I think he provided the environment as one of my first major jobs. I mean, leading up to that point, I was a soldier, but I was also a college student. I was a cadet. And so I had some responsibility, but this was big time when I came across him. I think for me, the identifying as a leader came somewhere around middle school, high school kind of time frame. I do remember somewhere around 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I started to notice when I would just kind of pause and think, I started to kind of lead my group of friends. They seemed to kind of look at me for what are we doing or how are we going to do this, or what movie are we going to go see tonight? And, those kind of things where it's like, oh, well, that's kind of a neat position to be in. And I think that was reinforced a couple times over. Sports was a big part of my life, my background. Being selected by your peers to lead your sports team as a team captain, that was pretty eye-opening, where it's like, wow, I'm surrounded by some really great athletes that are better than me, but they asked me to go out there for the coin toss or lead the team as a team captain. So that was pretty eye-opening. And I think two other examples. One is kind of a bad example. We went to a church retreat, and I may or may not have been a bit of a rascal for a couple minutes. Do you know those bills where they have individual letters that you rotate around and you could say like, welcome youth group or welcome kids? I had one of those boards. I may or may not have organized my buddies to rearrange those letters to say something silly or ridiculous or something like that. And one of the leaders in the group pulled me aside and just really opened my eyes and just said, Jon, this was, not a good decision and those kind of things. But he said, you understand that you're the leader of these young men out here, right? He said, you led them towards doing this. They're going to follow you. They respect you. Just something to that effect. Those comments just really stood with me, where I kind of used my influence, perhaps not in the best way possible. I guess the last example I'd share is I was fortunate to build a strong relationship with our head pastor growing up. So somewhere around high school, actually it was January of 2002, he gave me a Bible. And inside the Bible, he wrote a very nice note, but in there said, Jon, I've told you many times, you're a natural leader and you will lead either for God's glory or for your glory. I know that's a number of different examples, but I think from an early age, folks were going to look at me to lead them in one way or another.
I appreciate all those different examples too, because I think some people, they tend to look at leadership through a specific lens, but I always like to say that leadership is all around us, right? And I think that it's so amazing that you had people who took the opportunity and that you were open to the opportunity for those teaching moments where they really helped you kind of level up in that area and take that step towards leadership when maybe you wouldn't have thought, anything else of it. But how amazing to be able to have great leaders around you to help inspire your journey.
Yeah, very fortunate. I totally agree. I've had a chance to interact with some young soldiers and young leaders. And one of the things somebody shared with me a long time ago is, as you kind of go through life, just observe all the other leaders around you and take a second and try to do a bit of an inventory and say, do I respect this leader, respect them? Why do I want to follow them? And I think a lot of times those things will go back to those 3 C's that I talked about, where they're confident and they can lead, they're very confident, and then probably most importantly, they're caring, they care about me as a person. Or in contrast, you observe a leader and just say, I can't stand this guy or girl, and why? Why is that? And then start to, go back to your leadership journal and kind of jot down a few things and say, hey, I need to be cautious to be confident but not arrogant, or I need to manage my resources but not micromanage, or whatever it might be. So definitely always just encourage folks to be observant of other people, but take a second, pause and reflect, and then try to figure out why you respect some and not others.
I love this concept of a leadership journal. I also have a very robust leader and leadership journaling practice, if you will. So can you tell us more about that, and what does that look like as a regular practice for you?
I think for a while there, I started to, it was leadership journal, and I would try, write down a couple things in there. My buddies would tease me about my diary that I was keeping. But, you have a leadership journal, and then somewhere around college, this is going to be embarrassing to admit, but I discovered reading books. Everything up to that point, I only read books because I kind of had to, for school and to pass my classes and those things. And I really, really got interested in studying leadership and really trying to understand it. And I know you more than most will really appreciate, John Maxwell started buying up everything I could see from him. And so I kind of shifted from keeping my own personal leadership journal to what are these experts in leadership, these folks that are farther down the road than I am, folks that I admire and respect, what are they saying about leadership? And that started my interest in reading. And so I've slowly collected a couple hundred books, underline and take notes. It's kind of like their leadership thoughts with my notes mixed in on the side, if that makes sense.
It does. I know that when I read books about leadership too, I do tend to go back to just a regular leadership journal. And with that though, it's like, how can I use this? How have I seen this play out? And then if I'm able to use it relatively quickly, then I can kind of put the results of that. So I love that combination of journaling leading to the reading piece, kind of leading to the action. I think that's really incredible. You and I, we met in the military, and one of the things that I always loved about our conversations with it was that they had a very entrepreneurial focus. So in your perspective, what does it mean to have an entrepreneurial mindset?
Sure. So I think there's a couple different ways you can look at it. The first one that comes to mind, I like to share with my son a lot, is just as you go throughout life, kind of observe different things around you, and just, if you run into a problem or a stressor or something that it's just like, man, there has to be a better way. Maybe pause for a second, just say, wait, is there a better way? Is there a tool out there that can solve this? Is there a product that can make this process easier? I started writing down all these crazy ideas I would have, about 15 or 20 fairly legitimate ideas that I've got like on this list that I keep of just different products or services. And who knows, maybe come to fruition one day, or I'll come across someone who has more expertise in that particular area. But it is interesting. And I remember someone shared that with me, is just going around life and just say, why is this, so frustrating? There has to be a better way. So I think that's one way you could look at an entrepreneurial mindset. The other way that might be a little bit more relevant to what we're discussing right now is just thinking like a business owner. I'm sure you as well as I have been in multiple organizations, and some of them, I think, do a great job to embracing this kind of culture where everyone has a chance to influence the organization as a whole. And I think there's also been many other organizations that are like, you stay in your cubicle or stay in your lane, do your job, we'll handle the big boy stuff up here. But I just think that entrepreneurial mindset is definitely thinking like the business owner. Hopefully the leaders in that organization encourage that kind of thought process.
Yes, I've been fortunate to be in many organizations where the leaders are also very much like, how do we empower others to have that founder's mindset that, I am part of this, and like I'm actually part of it in a really big, meaningful way that will impact the future of the organization.
The superintendent at West Point, at one point, I remember he just kept talking about this idea of excellence, and it's a word we all use, and excellent this, excellence over here. But he also defined excellence, and I think that plays a piece into this entrepreneurial mindset. If you're always thinking like the business owner, you're always thinking about excellence. And the way he defined it was for you and I to always operate at the upper echelons of our potential, so that when you stay in that zone and that high level of performance, the upper echelons of your potential become the new norm. And then you push yourself even more to that next level. And so I always thought that was pretty interesting. And that's how he defined excellence. And I think organizations that are very intentional to meet with their teams and say, hey, how can we do better? Or be vulnerable and say, we're struggling in these areas. I know you guys just joined the team, or maybe this is not necessarily even your department or your problem, but what do you think about this? How can we improve? How can we do better? I think a lot of this falls back into that culture that's set by leaders at various levels.
When the superintendent had said that and had defined excellence, so there is the act of pushing ourselves right beyond our comfort zone so that we can grow. But I guess my question for you is, what is the balance then between, of course, we're going to push ourselves, but as a leader, when you're pushing someone else, how do you kind of go about that, pushing them right outside their comfort zone without pushing them so far, and kind of assessing them to your own version of excellence, or what excellence looks like for you personally?
Yeah, I think that's really just a very blunt conversation, a very candid conversation. And so in some cases, you could just push one of your team members because they can do it, they can achieve more, and maybe you do it without necessarily talking to them about it. But I think there's also the other side is harder. Maybe be very frank about it and just say, hey, these next couple of weeks, I'm going to ask a lot out of you, but that's only because I think you can do it. And give them a little bit more of the context, give them a little bit more of the why behind it. And especially if it's a significant, shift, in that relationship, all of a sudden you're getting pushed out of nowhere, that could almost be received kind of negative. Why are they pushing me? And it's actually a compliment. It's because we feel like you're the highest performer on the team. I'm going to push you a little bit. Maybe there's an opportunity to advance someone in terms of promotion or give them more responsibility type thing. And I also think there's a level of, you're going to push someone. I think it also should be verbalized that you see them as being a high performer or as doing pretty well. I'm sure many times leaders might say, Natasha's one of my best employees and she's crushing it. She's always doing more than we ask her. Let's go ahead and let's give her some more responsibility. It's like, before you give her more responsibility, give her the why behind it. Say, Natasha, let me tell you my thoughts. I think you're doing awesome. I think you're doing a great job. You're one of my highest performers. We're going to go ahead and crank this up a little bit. Let's see how this goes, and maybe we can discuss an opportunity for you to have some more responsibility. So I think it's a conversation there, between a leader and one of their employees and one of their teammates.
I was just talking with a group of people earlier today about the value of just acknowledging things. And I think that you're speaking to that here too, where sometimes people just need the acknowledgement. And in this case, it's like, why am I being pushed? So that some people might get into the mindset of, why are you pushing me so hard and maybe not someone else? But also with that acknowledgement comes this incredible buy-in that you're able to get. I don't necessarily like the phrase buy-in, but this incredible motivation, even though it is extrinsic. But I think that when people kind of know that you see this next thing in them, then they can kind of start to see that in themselves if they didn't previously.
I'm with you there. Yeah, it's interesting when you start looking at intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And for a lot of folks, sure, a promotion or a pay raise and some of those things, those are great. For a lot of people, a pat on the back is monstrous. Public acknowledgement, private acknowledgement, an encouraging note, especially when it's outside of the norm. It's not like it's your normal. You're not like heading into an annual review or assessment, and then they say you did a good job. Like, no, just randomly on a Thursday afternoon and just say, you know what, that project, you did a heck of a job. We stayed on schedule and under budget. That's pretty rare in our business. Great job. I mean, that person goes home with a little smile on their face, knowing that they did a good job and it was recognized. Did that really take a lot of effort out of you as a leader to acknowledge that? Probably not. I think it does need to be intentional, though. So however that works for a leader, figure out a way to make it intentional to encourage your employees and, tell them where they're at, and then also be willing to tell them, hey, we dropped the ball. All right, you're not in trouble. I'm going to underwrite this mistake and we're going to move on, together. As long as we don't make the same mistakes twice, shouldn't create a culture where folks are scared to fail either.
I was talking with another group of people about how failure is absolutely an option, and it happens more often than we're willing to admit, and we try to reframe it, but just let it be what it is, because that's such an opportunity to continue to move forward and to pivot. And if we could just label that. And earlier you had mentioned that vulnerability piece, and I think that that's also where leaders can lead the way in this, where it's saying, hey, this failed. Let's talk about why. Let's talk about what we do next, but let's also acknowledge what it is, because then that builds confidence in people to say, yeah, I have failed in the past, or, something could go wrong, but I know how to reflect and I know how to then take the next step forward.
There's an organization, I had a few friends that work for, and this particular organization, it's about once a week, they all get together and they have kind of faith-based, kind of a Bible study, type thing, and whatever faith someone might be, and anybody's welcome to participate. Well, they actually had the CEO and the founder ended up giving the encouraging words to kick off the week. This gentleman's in Forbes magazine. He has every reason to boast. He has every reason to do everything that comes along with success and money and power and those kind of things. He spent the entire 15 minutes just talking about his struggles. He just doesn't feel worthy to lead that organization. He just knows his flaws, and he doesn't understand why God's placed him in that particular position to lead that organization. And it's just, again, the contrast from what you would read about in the newspaper and in Forbes magazine to the man that's in front of you, almost on the edge of tears, just concerned that if he makes a wrong decision, it's going to impact thousands of families on top of the customers. It's almost a surreal kind of organization, but holy cow, can you believe the culture that comes out of an organization like that? It's unbelievable. And so you want to talk about vulnerability. There's a great example right there.
That is such an excellent example. And I think that who leaders need to be when they're public facing versus who they need to be internally facing, when they can really navigate that is really phenomenal. And I also think really rare.
That's it. That definitely permeates the rest of the organization. So then, this individual's vice presidents and their directors and their senior leaders, they're empowered to share some of those challenges. Actually, here's another example. Again, you and I both with military backgrounds. I remember it was either a 2 or 3 star general. So for context, one of the most senior leaders across the military actually got up on stage and he shared with individuals some of the challenges he was struggling with, including PTSD and mental health. And he was sharing what an incredible resource sitting down with a therapist, with a counselor, with a pastor had been for him personally. And leading up to that point, so many soldiers, would probably say, mental health, PTSD, suicidal thoughts, all those challenges, there's no way I could admit that to someone because that's going to impact my promotion. That's going to, they're going to make fun of me. They're going to demote me, all the negative consequences. There's no way I'm asking for help. I need to suck it up. And then to have this leader be unbelievably vulnerable in front of not just thousands of people, but his soldiers, to say, you know what, I needed help. Thank goodness he had the self-awareness to admit that. He went and received help. And on top of that, he actually shared that experience with his troops. How do you think that culture is when that permeates through everybody else? And then folks are like, you know what? Okay, if he can do it and he leads all of us and he's still moving up in the ranks, I think I can too. I could probably go get some help. And I think, at least from my perspective, I feel like there was a significant cultural shift with being vulnerable, especially when it comes to mental health, PTSD, suicidal thoughts, coming back from a war zone across the military. And I think it took some of those senior leaders really putting it all out there. Holy cow, the respect that comes out of sharing those kind of thoughts. That's real in an environment that is probably one of the most tough guy kind of environment, suck it up, move on, get the mission done at all costs kind of thing.
Those are great examples. And also, like you said, two individuals in a position where you would not expect that kind of vulnerability and that kind of candidness about who they are and what their struggles are. So kudos to them for how they developed and that how they've made an impression on everyone else that they lead. So that's really amazing. As a leader, whether you're looking at embracing having like an entrepreneurial mindset or that authenticity and that vulnerability, how can those leaders embrace that risk and urgency?
This is an interesting topic that I think can go in so many different directions. So if we're talking specifically in the context of entrepreneur and risk, I mean, holy smokes, the amount of risk an entrepreneur potentially could take is significant, right? So, I mean, we've heard stories of folks that put it all out on the line, right? I mean, second mortgages on their house, cashed out retirement. I mean, they went all in. It's boom or bust. Bust could be homeless on the streets with a lot of debt and hardly any assets. The risk is also the relationships. How's your relationship with your family, with your friend? How's your psyche and your mental health, right? So, I mean, there's huge risk with the entrepreneur lifestyle. And of course, I think most of the stories we read are folks that entrepreneurs, they risked a lot and fortunately it worked out for them. But the stories we don't read a lot are folks that risked a lot and it didn't work out for them because there's no stories about them. Who would want to write stories about folks that tried really, really hard, risked it all and failed? So I think risk is really an interesting approach in terms of entrepreneurship. So a couple different thoughts is, in terms of entrepreneur, I think I'm a huge fan of side hustles. We've talked about this many times before. And I think it was somewhere into my second or third professional career job where, we made enough money to pay the bills, but then we had a little bit extra. And that little bit extra was, what do we do with this? Do we just put it in a savings account? Like, what do adults do? How do I adult? And at that point, we talked about reading. I started the shift from leadership books over to investment books. And I started calling people that I, at least knew what a stock was or the stock market or what is real estate? How does that work? And so I would really encourage your listeners. I know for you personally, I think what are you reading still a book a week or something, or maybe even a book a day, I think it was at one point, but please just read and just keep reading as much as you can. But I really started to learn about different ways to have side hustles and really lower the risk of being an entrepreneur. So in other words, I would have my full-time job that would pay the bills, put food on the plate for the family. That was, so many words, stability. It was the side hustles that really got my juices flowing. And so we've had a number of different side hustles. One challenge with the military that you move so much. And so trying to maintain side hustles and businesses, especially a lot that are not digital and online, that are physical and in person, that's tricky when you move every year or two. for me, that was a way to lower the risk, that even if my side hustle and my entrepreneur endeavor flopped, I still was able to pay the bills this month. We weren't risking it all. We got to a point with one particular idea where it was a fork in the road. We can either leave the military and put it all on the line and pursue this opportunity. It was starting to get some traction, or we can not, and essentially kind of fold in so many words. And it was very, very difficult decision for me. So as you know, if you serve so many years in the military, there's opportunities to retire, and then you have some long-term benefits being a retiree. Or should I leave and risk it all for this one particular opportunity? I chose not to risk it and stay in the military. It was just too much of a risk for me personally, my family. Long story short, somebody else had the identical business model, idea, technology, everything, step for step, started their company 2 years after I started mine. Their company's worth about $3 or $4 billion today. So 2 responses. One is, yes, I knew that was a good idea. And of course, the other response is, dadgummit, I should have taken on some more risk there. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Maybe I would have had 10% of their success. So anyways, just to kind of put risk in perspective, I think you really have to consider the family aspect. Who is counting on you to pay the bills and take care of things? Is this a suitable risk? Is this too much or maybe too little? And the other piece, I think you can hedge your risk in entrepreneurship. Maybe franchisee business model could be for you, right? And with most franchisees, you can still be the business owner. You get the benefits of being an entrepreneur. It's your business. You lead. But they also hand you over the blueprints to what is oftentimes a successful franchise business model. And so as long as you follow the blueprints, you're probably going to be somewhat, profitable, and you can pay the bills and grow your business. And, there's a lot of nuances to all of that. But I think that's something too for folks that maybe want to start their own business. Maybe you don't have to start from scratch. Maybe find an industry you're interested in and start a franchise. Could be a way to lower that risk.
I think oftentimes we think of an entrepreneur and we're like, the first thing you were talking about, where you risk it all and responsibilities be darned, and this is going to work, and we're just all going to really lean into it. And while that is a very fun idea for a movie or on paper, the reality is that as adults and as family members and as members of our community, we do have certain responsibilities. So I not only like the different examples you gave, but also highlighting the point that we now live in a time where you can have side hustles. Right? It's not like you can only be doing one thing, which was kind of a thing, but also kind of a mindset from previous generations. And so I think that there's just so many different opportunities. And I'm glad that you highlighted all the different ways that those were opportunities.
A book I read, I believe it was last year, was called the EMyth. So the letter E for entrepreneur. So entrepreneur myth. Michael Gerber, I believe, is the author. Really awesome book. And as you read it, makes complete sense. But I'm going to try to theorize or summarize kind of what he was saying in terms of risk and entrepreneurship. Essentially, Natasha, just because you're a fantastic baker doesn't necessarily mean you know how to run a bakery. I obviously use you as an example. And so this gentleman in this book started to talk about somebody who just loved baking, and they were baking in a bakery. And they said, you know what, I want to do this on my own. I'm going to go ahead and start my own bakery. And they just talked about how they took the risk, right? They weighed the options, they took the risk, and they started their own bakery. And before you know it was just swamped with accounting, with marketing, with hiring, with the legal aspects and compliance and building permits and health, food safety law. And before you know it, the thing they enjoyed the most, the baking, they're so far away from it just because they're trying to keep the lights on and even have a business to run. And of course, this wasn't a 40-hour-a-week opportunity. This is 80 and 100-hour weeks around the clock, right? And even in your off time, mentally or physically, you might not be at the office, but mentally, you're just thinking about it, right? You're not even present with your friends. You're not present with your family at dinner. And so, you're just reading this book and kind of smiling because they totally get it. So how do you build systems and processes that anybody, and I mean almost anybody, can step in and do that process, right? They can step in and know exactly step 1, step 2, step 3. I mean, spell it all out for them, right? And then all of a sudden, you have someone who's able to handle the books. Now accounting is off your plate. Now you focus on this other segment. And he just kind of describes this whole idea of once you've gotten yourself into this mess with this bakery, in this example, how do you slowly step back and put people into positions, and not just put them into positions, but build processes in such a way that people can step in and start doing all of these things that you may or may not be good at or may not enjoy. And that is when you can finally, maybe, hopefully one day, really embrace the reason you want to be an entrepreneur, that you own the business and now you can choose where in the business you want to work on or just work on the business as a whole. And so anyways, really interesting book called the EMyth. I think it might help some folks that are considering entrepreneurship, and thinking about this. I think that also kind of goes back to maybe franchise model could be the winner for some individuals thinking about risk and entrepreneurship.
It's really interesting too that you say that sometimes people start this thing and then they actually get so far away from the passion that they had around a certain aspect of it. And I think it also goes to this mindset, unfortunately, that we have a lot now, where it's like every hobby you have could, and yes, it could be a business, but it also could just be a hobby that you enjoy and just leave it there. So I think that's also such an interesting thing to navigate, where it's like when you do decide to take that next step and share this passion that you have with others, keep in mind that there are other aspects around it that are necessary for it to be successful and for it to scale the way that you want it to. So just to kind of be, I don't want to say cautionary tale, because I think that, Sprinkles, as an example, this first cupcake shop, that was somebody's passion. And now it's, this huge thing. So I think there's just such an interesting balance there, though, where it's like, is this a passion project or is it just a hobby, and kind of the different nuance that goes around those two things?
I totally agree. And, maybe we know entrepreneurship is not for everybody. Side hustles are not for everybody. And I'm not saying that maybe they wouldn't be good at it. Maybe you just are the best you can be at whatever your primary role is. And maybe that role is just being a member of the family and being mom or dad or husband or wife or whatever that might be. And so I hope folks don't feel a pressure to take on more risk, because, as you can very quickly fill up your calendar to the point where, you're missing out on things with your children. You're missing out on fun, on smiling, on, a nap. You're missing out on a lot of different things because you're kind of all over the place. I'm 1000% guilty of that. At one point had a, full-time job with 2 or 3 side hustles, in different stages of infancy. And that's very hard, I think, to say, you know what, I'm good. I'm going to go ahead and close up. And it's not a complete loss, right? You take a lot of the lessons learned and things you learned along the way and you apply that to maybe something else. One other comment I'll pass along that I think is just incredibly true, at least for me personally. I went to an event, I think it was a prayer breakfast, and it was a breakfast with some different leaders of the city and some business leaders and different folks. And I remember one gentleman stepped up. He could, again, incredibly successful. He led a commercial office cleaning franchisee, or not franchisee, he led the franchise. He started the whole thing. And I remember the comment he said is he felt like the biggest tool, in his words, the biggest tool the devil used against him in his life is busyness. Or just in general, folks just can become so busy. When you look back on that time period in your life, what are you going to say about that? And I don't know about you, I still have yet to come across someone in their final years of life, arguably, who wish they spent more time working, wish they spent more time at the office. This idea of putting life in perspective as a whole. If I were to, God forbid, pass away today, what is going to be said about me at my funeral? Is it side hustles, right? Is it made a profit? He was a good soul. He was transactional. He got stuff done. Is that what I want if they were to talk about me at my funeral today? Is that what I want? What would they say? And am I okay with that? And I'll be honest, I'm not. For me personally, I feel like I really have dropped the ball, or I've missed the mark for many years, focused on transactions and doing a great job, that I think I've missed the people aspect a lot. One of the things I'm focused on now is my funeral. I'm not sure how many folks have said that to you before, but what is going to be said at my funeral? And I really, really, truly hope it's a lot of comments about how I helped an individual out of a tough situation. I helped them become better. I helped them get the job that they wanted. Our family was there for them in a time of need. We celebrated together. We laughed together. We cried together. I hope we get to a point where that funeral is sold out, right? A sold out funeral. Just because there's been so many people you've had a positive impact on, you've had a positive influence in their lives that they want to celebrate your life when you pass away.
Sometimes we get so focused on achieving things and becoming something that we do forget about those relationships. And earlier when we were talking about the risk and urgency, you had mentioned risk is also relationships. You could potentially be risking those things. And so I think that the perspective that you just shared is really valuable at any point in your life, to just reflect and be like, if today were the last day, how would I be remembered? But also, do the people that I care about know how much I value them? What leadership advice would you offer current leaders in any organization?
The first thing that comes to mind, I feel like, is just people over profits. And I just people. And I think there's been a good narrative that has kind of slowly emerged here, especially in the last couple of years, just the focus on people and individuals and checking in on each other and those kind of things. So I've been in organizations, I've created cultures and organizations where we missed it. We dropped the ball. We were not focused on people. We were focused on getting stuff done. And that's not bad. And of course, you have to do that, right? You have to be transactional and sell your products and services and deliver whatever it might be and accomplish the mission. Those are great things. That's fine. But don't miss out on the people aspect. And so check in on each other. And I'll tell you, for me personally, that's not something that comes natural for me. I think I have to be intentional. And even if that intentionality is block off your calendar for 30 minutes a week and just call or check in on your different individuals, see how they're doing. For nothing else, just to see how they're doing. It's not like, hey, how's it going? Oh, by the way, I need to check in on this task. And so that's something I would just pass off in terms of leadership. But, are you a manager who's transactional in getting stuff done? Or are you a leader who's transformational in making a positive impact on other people?
I like that. And I think it's always been important. And I think it's especially important now as we are in a work from home environment or a hybrid environment, or however kind of we're working now. It's now even more important for us to make that effort to pull people in and get to know them and let them get to know us. I know that throughout you have mentioned some amazing books and resources. Do you have one resource that you just always recommend to other people?
For me, I think it's really subjective. It really depends on what subject we're talking about. If it's a leadership book, there's a few that come to mind, or finance, or, stocks or investing, or emotional intelligence and those kind of things. Something I think would be maybe refreshing, maybe something that's a little bit different is, I've referenced my faith in Christ many times, but even just the Bible, the different people that make up the Bible, if you actually pause and kind of look into their story and try to put it into context. At the very beginning of our discussion, we talked about leadership principles that are timeless. I mean, this book was put together a while ago. The leadership truths come out of it, and they're still there. They're still, a part of it.
So if people want to reach out to you, how or where can they find you?
So in my opinion, the easiest place to reach me would be LinkedIn. It's arguably the only social media I do, if you still refer to that as social media. But on LinkedIn, shoot me a message. Love to connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been so awesome.
This was fun. I enjoy chatting about these topics. I miss the good old days where having cubicles near each other, we can just solve world problems right there on the spot before lunch.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Equipping Leaders podcast. For more leadership development content, you can visit my website, natashacheyenne.com, where you will find my leadership journal with dozens of articles, and the Cultivation Cafe, which is always growing and has leadership frameworks, book recommendations, and inclusion and mental health resources. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or at Equipping Leaders Podcast, and on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Join me next week for another episode.